Hey, what's up, and welcome to QnA, the show where I take your questions from YouTube and across the internet and answer them here in video format. Tons of questions to get into. Let's jump into it. Hugh Knows says, how disgusted would I be in the Browns organization if they decided to roll out next season with Deshaun Watson instead of Jameis, barring a free agency signing or draft pick? No one thinks he would make any sense, and they probably wouldn't do it, but I wouldn't put anything past him after starting Deshaun after the Giants and Commanders disaster. Um, y'all let me know if y'all want me to keep the question in the background when I'm answering it versus like defaulting back to this view. I'm not sure how I want to play with this new plugin that I have, but I think like maybe having the question back there longer would be helpful for people like responding to it. But anyways, back to the question from Hugh. Yeah, I would be incredibly disappointed if the Browns organization decide to continue to give Deshaun Watson a run after it's been made obvious. The only justification for letting him play as long as they did, right, 7 weeks, is because they wanted to be 100% sure that before they pull the plug on Deshaun Watson, that it's definitely Deshaun Watson that's the problem. Like, that's the only justification for it. And whether or not you got that from his play, him tearing his Achilles is all the justification that you need. Even if he was playing better than he was in 2024, him popping his Achilles would make this a huge question mark. Him playing as bad as he was, plus the Achilles, plus the obvious uptick in quarterback play since he's been injured, it creates a situation where it would be basically malpractice if the Cleveland Browns decided to stick with Deshaun Watson through all of this and continue to treat him as if he's the de facto franchise quarterback of this team. The good news is I don't think that's the direction that this team is going down. Everything tells me that the gears, the mechanisms of the Cleveland Browns are moving towards the direction of moving on from him at quarterback eventually. Again, you can't just cut Deshaun, and I know people will bring that up, well, you're still going to have to pay him. And yeah, you can pay him. But what we have seen so far this season is you're a better football team if you pay Deshaun Watson to sit on the bench. Like, it doesn't matter how much he gets paid at that point. It does not make you a better football team to play him. So it would be worth $46 million to not even play him. And it's not like the Browns went out on that one. I'm just saying, if you're factoring in his money and saying, oh, he can't be benched because he's being paid so much money, yeah, he's going to continue to get paid that much money. But also, you know, if you can fulfill the quarterback position by paying Jameis Winston $10 million over the next 2 or 3 years, I'd rather do that. Like, you can afford that, afford Deshaun Watson, and then figure out how you're going to maneuver your way out of it, which is just going to take a couple years because you're at the tail end of that deal. Also, you have to consider, like, it would be super malpractice if they decide to come back here, because Deshaun's not going to start week one more than likely. And if he does start week one, he's going to have very little preseason and training camp time. This is not an injury where he's projected to come back in like June, right? This is an injury where he might be eligible to practice in September. Like, if he goes through a super fast timeline, 9 months is technically the fastest you can come back from all of this. And Deshaun Watson's not Kirk Cousins. He's not Aaron Rodgers, and both those quarterbacks are struggling right now too. But he's not those two quarterbacks, which is to say he has not played enough football in the last couple of years that you could just put out there with like a very limited camp. You just can't do that. He definitely needs a full camp. So yeah, it would make zero sense to treat this quarterback position as if the seat is just Deshaun's and you're waiting on it. And that would sound like, if you're looking for the thing that would sour people on the organization, that would be the final straw for a lot of people. A lot of people who have been very patient throughout this process, may I add. But thank you for that question, Hugh. Let's move on to the next question. And this is from Club Sandwich Guy. All right, what's up, Club Sandwich Guy? Am I crazy to not want to draft Shador Sanders? Not because of his talent, but his personality and drama and presence it would bring. I feel like Browns fans are in love at a all-time low with the team with due to Deshaun Watson and forcing them to go with another drama filled experience could break the camel's back if it doesn't work out. What do you think? All love. I have this battle too. One, the first thing we have to acknowledge is that Shador Sanders drama, not the same level of drama that Deshaun Watson has. Like, we cannot pretend as if these two things are equal. Like, Deshaun Watson discussed people on a moral level. Shador Sanders, maybe you don't like that he flexes his wrist or whatever it is, or has like the jewelry and all that. Like, I don't know. The thing with Shador too, because like you mentioned his personality, I don't think his personality's a problem. Like, I watched his podcast. He doesn't seem to have that much of a, like, he has the standard pro athlete personality, right? Like, I don't think his personality is a problem. I think it's more or less the name on the back of his jersey and the presence of that name, right? I don't think his personality's bad. He doesn't seem like a bad person. He seems like a good leader. He looks like his teammates love him, right? I'm not going to say anything about his personality. That's not my beef with bringing in Shador Sanders, or my worry with bringing in Shador Sanders. It is everything else that's not him that comes with the last name Sanders, right? To Shador, to his father, Dion, has done a great job of building up a fan base around things related to Deion Sanders. This is extended to Travis Hunter. This is extended to Jackson State University. This is extended to Colorado, right? Like, that is what his father has done a great job. He's extended the primetime brand to everything associated with him on the football team, on the football field successfully. And partially because Deion has been a better than average coach throughout all of this, right? Like, at Jackson State, he won the SWAC, got to the Celebration Bowl 2 times, and then at Colorado, it looks like they might get to the Big 12 championship. So as much jokes as people had about this Deion thing going on, and look, I did not feel confident about this Deion thing past that first year of Colorado, but he has proven himself to be useful. Like, as a coach, like, he's not, this isn't a gimmick, right? So that means that when you draft Shador, you're not just drafting Shador Sanders. You're drafting Shador Sanders fans, which are Deion Sanders fans, right? And I think that's what you're worried about. I don't think it has anything to do with Shador Sanders' personality, right? His personality is fine. He seems like a good kid. It's you don't want to put this fan base in a position where if Shador is shaky, the fan base is going to be at war again with Sanders stands, right? Like, we're going to do this shit all over again. I think this is PTSD, not actual PTSD, but Brown's post-traumatic stress disorder, BTSD, right? This is what that is. And it's understandable because we went from Baker Mayfield wars, and Baker had his own fan base. Deshaun Watson had his own fan base, the wars with the Watson Warriors. And I think a lot of people just want to break from it. Like, we want a quarterback who we could just embrace as a city and not have to worry about, like, all the other people who might want to be a fan of him. But also, I have to say this, like, as much as we're tired of it, we might just have to acknowledge that this is what drafting a quarterback's going to be like in the NIL era. Yeah, does the Sanders family have the biggest fan base that's going to come along, and maybe they're going to be obnoxious if this whole thing doesn't work out. But that's going to happen if you draft Cam Ward. He has a stand base behind him. That's going to happen if you draft Jalen Milroe. He has a stand base behind him, right? Any quarterback who's getting any buzz in the first round, they're going to have a stand base behind them. And this is just part of being a sports fan, unfortunately, in the 21st century. So is that a reason not to draft Shedeur Sanders, right? I understand where you're coming from. I understand the nature of your problem. But if the Browns, and I'm not there yet with Shedeur, I like to add, but if the Browns are there with Shedeur, where they think he's a franchise quarterback, right? And they think that he's going to be the guy that can bring this team in, and they're not worried about the Sanders family vetoing him from coming to Cleveland or some goofy shit like that. This whole thing, the Sanders fan base should not stop them from drafting him, because any quarterback you draft in the first round, that's going to be a possibility, right? Alabama fans love Jalen Milroe. They're going to come with him. Miami fans love Cam. They're going to come with him. Like, it's just going to be the case. That's just what it is in the 21st century. So if you're going to let that stop you from drafting Shedeur, you have to acknowledge that this is going to stop you from ever drafting a quarterback in the first round. And if that's the case, then it's not a factor that we should really bring in, because it just is what it is. This is what drafting a quarterback is going to entail. These guys are popular coming out of school. They are well paid coming out of school, at least the ones that get drafted in the first round. And that's part of it. So, I just think it's something we got to get used to. But I get it. And I am worried about having to do this again, and the whole stand base versus fan base stuff. I'm tired of it. I'm so tired of quarterback wars. I'm so tired of people deciding they're going to stand for a quarterback forever instead of like root for their fucking team. I get it, but it might just be what it is here. And I don't think that that's something that we can avoid, no matter how popular a player is or unpopular a player is. Oliver says, with being retrospective, do you think we should have been more worried about the lack of news and content from the front office and the team during the offseason? How should we expect the next one to proceed? No, I don't think we should be concerned about that. Like, that's not what concerns me about the offseason. I think they were coming into this thinking Deshaun Watson would be healthy. He would build on 2023, and Deshaun, he shocked everybody with how bad he played. And I think that's what happened this season. I don't think this is about them not being too loud in the offseason. Scare Bear says, what do you think are the chances of the Browns bringing back JAMEIS for another year or two? He's been a breath of fresh air and is playing well. How can he possibly bridge until the next starting quarterback's ready? Here's what I'm going to say on JAMEIS, right? And I want you guys to remember, I was the first person to bring JAMEIS to you, right? I was talking about bringing in JAMEIS well before anybody else. Joe Flacco was still taking snaps here, and I was like, hey, next year you should go after JAMEIS. So give me the credit and understand that I'm the dude who was early on this Jameis Winston thing. Here's what I'm going to say about Jameis. Jameis as a bridge quarterback will be fine as long as we understand what Jameis Winston is and is not. He is never going to be a franchise quarterback. And I say this as somebody who was early on Jameis. And the reason I was early on Jameis is because I was familiar with what Jameis was doing, right? He's not going to be a franchise quarterback. He's going to throw 3 interceptions a game multiple times a season. He's going to be always up there in interceptions. But he can bridge the gap for a couple of years. And as long as our expectations stay on that, as long as we don't start to think that Jameis Winston is going to be something that he's not, as long as we stay within a reasonable realm, right? Like, Jameis Winston is definitely the quality of quarterback who can have a hot year and make a Pro Bowl. Jameis Winston is not going to win the MVP, right? As long as we are reasonable about our expectations from one brother, Jameis Winston, and we're not getting carried away, that will be fine. But if you start to buy into Jameis Winston could be an MVP, he could be, we should just give him the franchise quarterback deal, and then he throw 4 interceptions, you're going to be furious about that. The key is you can't get 2 up with a 3 touchdown game from Jameis. You can't get 2 down with a 3 interception game from Jameis. They're both always on the table. It's just a luck of the draw every week. But that's what the experience is going to be with Jameis. You're going to have a ceiling on. If we're just talking about a bridge, I think that's a good idea. but we can't get carried away with Jameis because he's going to give you an opportunity to get carried away with him because he's a streaky player. And we've lived through the streaky player experience. Baker Mayfield, well-known streaky player, right? Starts off the season, MVP candidate. Then he has a rough couple weeks where you think he threw like 7 interceptions in 2 weeks. Now he's not an MVP candidate. He's not as bad as people think he is. He's not as good as people think he is, right? That's where Baker Mayfield exists. He's Schrodinger's quarterback. Jameis Winston is a similar thing. Jameis is never as bad as people say he is, but he's never as good as some people say he could be. He's going to be somewhere in the middle, and what he is hard to tell. He's in that Schrodinger's quarterback box of quarterbacks you don't know what to expect from. And as long as we're cool with that and understand that that's going to be what it is, I think it can be successful. I'm just really worried about the fan base getting carried away. Shout out to the Spartan says, how well does Jameis have to play to be brought back next year as a short-term starter, ride through the Watson contract? Is there any way he could play well enough that it stops him from taking the QB? We should never get to that point. I'm dead serious. I am not anywhere close to the anti-Jameis Winston guy. I am the guy who told you they need to go get Jameis, right? Before free agency even started. Any contract extension with Jameis Winston, any ideas of extending his time as starter has to be done with the understanding that it needs to be temporary. Jameis ain't going to hold the franchise down for 5-6 years, right? People will get tired of it after like 5-6 years because you're going to want him to be better than what he is. But for a couple of years, yeah, you can ride it. But it has to be temporary, right? That's just what it is. Jameis Winston is 30 years old. He's not going to become somebody he's never been in his NFL career. I know we looking at Geno Smith and thinking that could be Geno Smith, but Jameis has played so much more football than Geno Smith, right? Like the book is out on what Jameis is and isn't. He's much better than he was in Tampa Bay. He takes care of the football better than he did in Tampa Bay, but he's still Jameis. So as long, again, as we go into the Jameis Winston contract, knowing it's temporary, planning to draft somebody in the next few years, and maybe this is what bridges you to the 2027 draft class so you can get a quarterback that year, right? If you don't like this year or 2026. I'm fine with that. But we have to understand this is a 2 to 3 year project at max. And if you get to that third year, you are ecstatic about getting to that third year. Really a 2-year project at max. So as long as we get that, and it's going to be tough for Cleveland because we have not had very many quarterbacks start 2-3 years for us. And Jameis will play at a well enough level that we might consider it because it's better than nothing. Like, he's certainly better than nothing. But it has to be temporary. As long as it's temporary, we're good. We're good. They still got to draft somebody. Like, the whole thing with Jameis, it only makes sense if you start to get somebody behind him. That's my only thing with this. Teddy says, do you see us cutting Deshaun Watson after the season and going forward with Winston as a starter, or drafting or picking up another veteran like Daniel Jones? I do not see the Browns cutting Deshaun Watson because it's not financially the smart thing to do. It's likely Deshaun will be on PUP most of the offseason, and then they might activate him off PUP during the regular season, probably it's going to be a similar comeback to Nick Chubb, right, where he might be eligible to come off PUP after 4 weeks, and then they might activate him. They might choose not to activate him. He's going to get paid. He's going to be on the Cleveland Browns. I just think he's going to be inactive or on the bench for most of next year. That being said, should the Browns entertain going after a veteran like Daniel Jones? I don't think it's the craziest thing in the world if you bring back Jameis and then take a flyer on Daniel Jones. I don't think that's nuts. It's going to be memed. You're going to get roasted for doing it, but I don't think that's crazy if you're Kevin. Now, the thing is, I think Daniel Jones has had a good coach the last few years and Brian Dable. and he still hasn't been able to figure it out. So maybe he's just not worth trying to salvage. But I can see the Browns saying, hey, we're going to pick up Daniel Jones, maybe move off the DTR experiment. And at the very least, it's an upgrade from DTR. Like, I think if as long as it's done in that kind of thought process, and you're like, okay, Daniel Jones is better than DTR. We can let DTR, Daniel Jones, and Jameis Winston compete for the starting job in the preseason, and whoever wins out that competition starts for the year, with knowing that it's likely going to be Jameis that starts. I think that's fine. I know that it's not going to be a popular idea to advocate for, though. Daniel Jones is incredibly unpopular right now. Chamrod says, with the win, it's easy to say that Kevin and Andrew are off the hot seat. However, if Jameis was the QB earlier, the Browns may have had 4 to 6 wins in a position to make a run. Who will take the fall for not making the switch earlier? And do you think we'll ever find out who was responsible for delaying the switch? I think we're finding it out now. The fact that like Adam Schefter is on TV telling the world that we're not going to fire the 2-time coach of the year tells you everything you need to know. I think once they got past the Commanders game, a conversation was had about Deshaun Watson and what they're going to do. And the conversation ended with, hey, if we're going to pull the plug on Deshaun, we got to know for sure. It could have been a consensus decision, but I don't think that decision was made with winning in mind for this year. I think the decision was made collectively with the understanding that for the long-term health of this franchise, it is better for them to know now what they do or don't have in Deshaun Watson definitively. And I think that led to them playing Deshaun Watson longer than he should have been played. And part of that is accepting that the win-loss record might be sacrificed with that discovery effort, right? So that's what it sounds like to me. You can feel how you can feel about that, right? Because maybe they're thinking, yeah, we'd be like a 500 team with Jameis Winston, but we wouldn't really be a threat to do anything. So what's the difference from being 500 and knowing Jameis can be the bridge versus being, where you're at right now and knowing Jameis can be the bridge? I could see both parts of that argument, but I think that was the process, and that's why it's not going to be Kevin and Andrew's fault that Jameis is playing well, because Deshaun didn't stay the starter because they thought that, despite what they said, because they thought Deshaun gave you the best chance to win. I think Deshaun was the starter because they felt the need to figure out if Deshaun can be salvaged in any way before they make the decision to pull the plug on him. And now that he has the Achilles tear plus this sample of games, the decision has been made for them to pull the plug on the whole Watson era. LT Filth says, if you had to pick between Jameis, Jacoby, and Flacco or another vet bridge through the next year, who would you prefer? Probably Jameis. And look, I think it's possible. You could get Jacoby to be the backup. And I would love that. Like if you had Jameis Winston, Jacoby Brissett as the backup, and then like you could DTR, Daniel Jones, name a guy as the third quarterback. I would love that. Flacco is just, he's 38, man. Like it's a rat with him. And if you want somebody to bridge, right? Let's say we're talking about bridging from this year, from next year, the year after, all the way to 2027. We're talking 3 years in the future. He's already 38. Joe Flacco is not going to be in the NFL at 41 years old. So Jameis, and then you can sign Jacoby to be the backup. He's only making $3 million this year. So, and he's not going to make more money in the offseason. You can probably get him on a vet minimum. So Jameis with Jacoby as a backup, I think that's fine. I think that's fine, right? I think that's a fine bridge for next year. Mike says, if the Browns draft a QB this year, do you see them keeping Jameis as the bridge QB, or will they try to find someone who has similar traits and tendencies as the rookie they draft? I think if the Browns draft a rookie, they're not going to force him on there early. If you look at how the Browns have operated with rookies, they have not been super eager to give them a bunch of playing time off the bat. So I think keeping Jameis still is thinking about quarterback in the 2025 draft, in my opinion. But that's going to be it for the questions. I want to thank everybody for asking these questions. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.